Throughout history, Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, has been remembered as the cradle of human civilization. Rising from what is now modern-day Iraq, Babylon was not only renowned for its magnificent architecture, but also infamous for its haunting religious rituals that captured the fascination and fear of the ancient world. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, dazzled with their splendor. Yet behind the walls of Babylon's hidden temples, rituals were performed that revealed a far darker, more terrifying reality. For the people of Babylon, priests were not merely spiritual leaders. They were the very voice of the gods, bridges between kings and commoners, and at times the ultimate arbiters of life and death. Their words were unquestioned, their authority absolute. But behind this divine power lay practices so disturbing they would chill the blood of anyone who dared uncover them. Today, we will explore one of history's most unsettling secrets, the horrifying acts that Babylonian priests inflicted upon young male virgins. These accounts do not simply reveal the religious beliefs of an ancient society. They expose the terrifying ways in which power, fear, and faith could be twisted to enslave the human spirit. Picture the towering temples of Babylon, colossal ziggurats gleaming beneath the rising sun, chants and hymns echoing in the air, the smoke of incense curling skyward, mingling with the cries of sacrificial animals. Yet behind this spectacle lurked a grim secret. The chosen boys, pure, untouched, and revered as sacred. These virgins were considered the most precious offerings to the gods. But to be chosen was no blessing. It was the beginning of a nightmare. For under the guise of appeasing divine wrath, priests subjected these innocent youths to rituals of unimaginable horror. Historians and archaeologists suggest that these practices were never merely religious duties. They were instruments of control, cementing the priests' dominance over Babylonian society through fear. Now let us journey back thousands of years into the dust-filled streets of Babylon, a city of trade, science, and law, but also a city shadowed by unspeakable secrets. In this video, you will witness one of the most sinister and mysterious rituals in human history. Prepare yourself, for the horrifying acts Babylonian priests carried out upon male virgins are not mere legends. They are chilling truths etched into the very pages of history. To truly understand Babylonian civilization, we must first look at their belief system. The people of Babylon were deeply devoted to a polytheistic religion. In their world, every force of nature, every star in the heavens, every river, and even every disease was believed to be the will of a god. At the head of this divine order stood Marduk, the supreme deity, ruler of the heavens and guardian of cosmic order. Rising at the heart of Babylon was the massive temple complex, the Etemenanki Ziggurat, dedicated to Marduk himself, and standing between these gods and the people were the priests. But Babylonian priests were far more than mere spiritual figures. They were astronomers, physicians, magicians, teachers, and even political advisors. No war could be waged, no law could be passed, no sacrifice could be made without their blessing. For the Babylonians believed that only the priests could truly speak to the gods. So how did these priests maintain such absolute power? The answer is simple: fear. In Babylon, the greatest weapon was not the sword nor the army. It was the threat of divine wrath. A priest could condemn a person by declaring them cursed by the gods, and that single sentence could result in total social isolation. Families feared that even the smallest act of disobedience against the priesthood could invite disaster, plague, or death. Beyond daily rituals, priests were also seers. They studied the skies, interpreting the movement of the stars and planets to predict the future. If an eclipse occurred, the priests might declare it an omen of death for the king, sparking political turmoil and even violent struggles for the throne. In this way, a few words from their lips could change the destiny of an empire. Yet their influence did not stop there. The priests were also the guardians of sacred rituals. In Babylonian religion, two concepts were of the utmost importance: sacrifice and virginity. Sacrifice was the key to pleasing the gods, while virginity represented purity, the closest state to the divine. And it was here that the fate of male virgins became tragically intertwined with the power of the priesthood. To the public, the selection of these youths appeared to be an honor. Families believed their sons had been chosen for a holy duty, a noble service to the gods. But the truth was far darker. Behind temple walls, these young men were drawn into rituals shrouded in secrecy, ceremonies that were far more terrifying than anyone outside could imagine. This raises a crucial question: why male virgins? The answer lies in the mindset of Babylonian society. Male virginity was seen as an exceptionally rare form of purity. While women were often expected to preserve their chastity until marriage, young men were typically encouraged, or even pressured, to engage in sexual experience early in life. Thus, a boy who remained untouched was considered uniquely pure and powerful in the eyes of the gods. The priests, recognizing this cultural rarity, exploited it for their own purposes. In the next chapters, we will uncover how these chosen youths were selected, the rituals they endured, and the horrifying fates that awaited them. But first, let us examine more closely how virginity was defined in Babylonian culture, and why it held such immense power in the eyes of the priesthood. When the selection process for male virgins in Babylon was complete, their lives changed irrevocably. When they passed through the temple's magnificent gates, they did not embark on a holy pilgrimage. They stepped into rituals so dark they chilled the blood. To the public, they were offered to the gods. In reality, they were handed over to the priests. The temple's exterior overflowed with grandeur, high walls, statues trimmed in gold, and air thick with incense. But behind that splendor lay shadowed chambers. It was there, out of sight of the people, that the priests displayed their real power and performed ceremonies the public never saw. Only priests and the chosen victims were allowed into those rooms. The selected male virgins stood at the center of those secret rites. The ceremonies usually took place at night. When the sun set, the temple fell silent, and only the priests' whispers and the spirals of incense smoke remained. The youths were first subjected to purification rites, their bodies anointed with sacred oils, prayers intoned over them, and mysterious symbols traced on their hands and feet, marks believed to call the gods. In truth, those signs were tools that reinforced the priest's authority. The young men were left naked and brought before the gods in the most visible state of their purity. That exposure often shattered them psychologically. Respected in their communities and a family's pride, inside the temple walls they were stripped of identity and reduced to nothing but offerings. At the ritual's most critical moments, the priests, claiming to represent the will of the gods, inflicted various tortures on the youths. These torments were as much psychic as they were physical. Amid hours of prayers, shouting, drum beats, and choking incense, the victims lost their will entirely. Often already weakened by days of fasting and sleep deprivation, they had no strength left to resist. The priests declared these ceremonies to be presentations of the youth's virginity to the gods. Sometimes the offering was performed symbolically. Other times, much more horrific methods were used. Whatever the form, the experience became a traumatic nightmare for the victims. While the community believed their sons had been chosen for a sacred duty, in truth, they had become the victims of a brutal ritual. After the rite, the fates of these young men varied. Some were killed, announced as having joined the god. Others were kept alive, but never permitted to return to ordinary life. They might be made temple slaves or completely isolated from society. In either case, The innocence that once defined them was torn to pieces by the priest's hands. The most terrible thing about these secret rites was that the public never learned the truth. Outsiders believed their sons had been blessed by the gods, unaware of the horror within the walls. The priests kept these secrets tightly sealed. If the truth had leaked out, the entire system of faith might have collapsed. For centuries, these ceremonies were dismissed as legend. But modern archaeologists and historians have found clues on cuneiform tablets and among temple ruins that point to such rituals. What is told is more than myth, a nightmare hiding in the shadows of real history. Now let us examine more closely how these offerings were carried out after the rites, and which gruesome methods the priests used to appease the gods' wrath. The most terrifying phase of these ceremonies was the sacrifice of the male virgins. To the Babylonian priests, these young men were the purest and most sacred beings to offer to the gods. Their lives were seen as instruments through which the priests could enact the will of the gods. These rituals were not merely religious acts, they were demonstrations of power, reinforcing the priests' control over society. While the public believed the youths had ascended to the gods, the reality inside the temple was a nightmare beyond imagination. Sacrificial ceremonies were typically held in hidden chambers, far from the eyes of the populace. Yet the symbolic aspects of the ritual were presented publicly. Crowds in the city squares were mesmerized by the scent of incense, the loud prayers of the priests, and the pounding rhythms of drums. The audience watched, believing the chosen youth was being offered to the gods, unaware of the horrors unfolding behind closed doors. Through these displays, the priests successfully instilled both fear and awe, magnifying their perceived power in the eyes of the people. Inside the temple's inner sanctums, the true brutality began. The selected male virgins were first bound by their hands and feet, anointed with sacred oils, and marked with special symbols. These markings were not merely religious, they were instruments of psychological control. The youths lost all sense of self, moving solely at the priest's command. At this stage, time became meaningless. Prolonged fasting, sleeplessness, and sensory deprivation left the victims physically and mentally exhausted. At the ritual's most critical moments, the priests claimed to act as agents of divine will, subjecting the youths to various tortures, both physical and psychological. Sometimes the victims were forced to chant hymns at a deafening volume. Other times they were beaten or exposed to choking incense smoke until they nearly lost consciousness. Every act was regarded as a test of fortitude to present to the gods. The priests treated the youth's fear and suffering as sacred offerings. The methods of sacrifice varied according to the city's needs and religious interpretations. If an epidemic struck, the youths might be burned, believed to purify the city by destroying evil spirits. In times of war, their blood could be collected and sprinkled over soldiers, thought to ensure victory. During birth or harvest rituals, the boys might be bound symbolically, marked as living offerings to the gods. Families were almost always unaware of the true horrors. They were told their sons had been blessed by the gods and had ascended to the heavens. Some families even took pride in their loss, believing it a mark of divine favor. To the public, these sacrifices symbolized hope and a sacred duty. In reality, the youths had become instruments of the priest's power and control. These practices formed part of a broader system of fear and obedience. The public never questioned the brutality of the rituals, for priests' words were sacred, and defying them was equated with defying the gods themselves. This climate of fear extended beyond the selected virgins. It controlled the entire society. People obeyed the priests' commands, believing their compliance ensured their own safety. Archaeological evidence shows that these rituals were not mere legend. Cuneiform tablets, temple ruins, and various symbolic artifacts provide tangible proof of the horrific experiences male virgins endured. While details are limited, excavations and research reveal the central role these ceremonies played in Babylonian religious and social life. The psychological impact of these rituals shaped society for generations. Temples were regarded as both terrifying and awe-inspiring. People feared the priest's authority and raised their children cautiously under the weight of that power. The chosen virgins stood at the intersection of societal pride and unimaginable tragedy. Behind Babylon's dazzling architecture and cultural brilliance, these dark rituals and politics of fear were carefully concealed. These truths remind us that this civilization is remembered not only for its grandeur and wealth, but also for the ways it exploited human innocence and spirit. Next, we can explore the lasting psychological and social effects of these rituals, the trauma endured by both the public and the victims themselves. After the rituals, only pain and fear remained. The trauma experienced by the selected male virgins left deep, lifelong scars. Even if many survived physically, they were often completely broken spiritually. The horror they endured did not fade with time. It became a relentless, years-long nightmare. Insomnia, recurring flashbacks of the events, and a pervasive lack of trust in even the simplest human relationships were among the most common consequences of this trauma. The societal impact was equally profound. When the public witnessed the sacrifice of the chosen virgins, or even learned of the rituals, they experienced a mixture of fear and awe-driven obedience. The priest's power became unshakable, and the daily life of the city revolved around this climate of terror. People constantly monitored their behavior near temples and raised their children to be proper in the eyes of the priests. In this way, fear became an intergenerational mechanism of control. Families of the chosen youths also suffered deep psychological conflict. On one hand, knowing that their sons had been dedicated to the gods was a source of pride. On the other, understanding the suffering and loss involved generated profound guilt and helplessness. This dynamic shaped the collective psyche of Babylonian society. Fear, obedience, and uncertainty cast a constant shadow over daily life. These rituals also reinforced the social hierarchy. Priests occupied the top tier, with kings and nobles even deferring to their decisions. The chosen virgins, by contrast, occupied the lowest rung, reduced to mere instruments of ritual. This structure provides a striking example of how power and control can be institutionalized within a society. People learn to live under the constant weight of religious authority and fear. Other young people in Babylon were deeply affected as well. Those not chosen lived in constant anxiety, imagining what fate awaited the selected. Social behaviors, family relationships, and personal choices were all influenced by the shadow of the priests. The collective psychology of the society became a complex mix of fear and reverence. Historians have also studied the long-term consequences. Archaeological findings and written records suggest that these rituals left a profound impact on the mental health of the population. Trauma, fear, and guilt became a form of cultural inheritance, creating psychological pressure that persisted for generations. People learned to live not according to their own desires, but according to the rhythms of the priest's rituals. At the same time, these horrific practices reveal just how complex and simultaneously cruel Babylonian religious and social structures could be. No matter how impressive their architecture, achievements in science, or commercial prowess, the darker aspects of this civilization remain a haunting part of history. Rituals regarded as sacred duties expose the deepest, most sinister elements of human nature. The tragedy of the chosen male virgins was not merely individual suffering. It became a societal trauma. Their pain reinforced the priest's power and preserved a social order founded on fear. Babylon, therefore, is remembered not only as a magnificent civilization, but also as a society in which obedience and terror were intricately woven into the fabric of daily life. Now, we can examine how historians and researchers interpret these dark rituals, and how modern archaeology and science have shed light on these events. Modern historians and archaeologists, while investigating the horrifying rituals performed by Babylonian priests on male virgins, emphasize that these events were far from mere legend. Records on cuneiform tablets, temple ruins, and various symbolic artifacts all indicate that these rituals were real. However, the limited nature of these sources makes it difficult to fully reconstruct the events. Nonetheless, researchers continue to study the societal and psychological impacts of these practices. Historians do not view these acts solely as expressions of religious belief. They argue that the use of fear and tragedy as tools of social control provides critical insight into Babylonian governance and societal structure. In other words, the sacrifice of male virgins was simultaneously a ritual offering to the gods and a strategic method of reinforcing the priests' authority and the populace' obedience. Archaeologists studying the interiors of temple ruins analyze the layout of rooms and symbolic markings to reconstruct how these rituals were carried out. For instance, some chambers' complex designs and hidden passages ensured that ceremonies remained hidden from the public eye. Marks left by the sacrificed youths, inscriptions on walls, and symbolic representations on cuneiform tablets suggest that these practices were systematic and meticulously planned. Modern scientists also examine these events from a psychological perspective. They explore the long-term effects of trauma and societal pressure on both the individuals who were directly affected and the broader community. Studies indicate that fear and obedience-based systems have historically shaped societies and left enduring psychological legacies across generations. The dark rituals of Babylon continue to fascinate and horrify people today. The city's grand temples, magnificent architecture, and scientific achievements are remembered alongside these grim secrets. This chapter of human history reveals not only the religious beliefs of an ancient civilization, but also how the combination of power and fear could enslave the human spirit. Thanks to archaeology and historical research, Babylon's legacy is being illuminated once more. The traces left by these dark rituals help us understand the dual nature of human civilization, its grandeur and its capacity for cruelty. The horrifying ceremonies conducted by the priests cast a shadow over Babylon's glory, while exposing some of humanity's darkest impulses. In conclusion, the rituals performed by Babylonian priests on male virgins were not just historical events. They are a story of a civilization where power, fear, and faith were deeply intertwined. Even after thousands of years, these events offer a lasting lesson. Sanctity and authority, when misused, can destroy even the most precious aspects of humanity. And that is precisely why Babylon's grand splendor is remembered not only for its magnificence, but also for the dark secrets that have endured in history. Centuries later, Babylon's magnificent temples and towering ziggurats still captivate the imagination. Yet behind their grandeur lie dark secrets that have stirred both curiosity and fear throughout history. The fate of the chosen male virgins was not merely a series of individual tragedies. It was also a societal power play. In the hands of the priests, fear and obedience became tools, while innocence was destroyed as part of a ritual. Today, when we look at the ruins of Babylon, we see more than just structures built of stone. We can also glimpse the horror that unfolded thousands of years ago. Thanks to archaeology and historical research, we can trace the remnants of these dark rituals and learn from the shadows of the past. The tragedy of the chosen youths endures as one of the darkest chapters of human history, reminding us of the dangerous fusion of power, fear, and faith. The rituals performed by Babylonian priests symbolize both the civilization's grandeur and its darkness. While they claim to act as agents of the god's will, in reality, they reinforce their own power and shape the collective psyche of society. Studying these events today allows us to observe both the fascinating and terrifying aspects of human nature. And that is precisely why the shadow of the past still lingers. Magnificent architecture, a civilization of remarkable achievements, and the dark rituals hidden beneath its splendor. Babylon lives on not only in history books, but also as a mirror reflecting the light and darkness within the human soul. Remember, even the most glorious civilizations attempt to hide their darkest secrets and terrifying truths. The horrifying rituals imposed on male virgins in Babylon teach us the importance of understanding history and remind us that lessons from the past remain relevant for societies today. Thus, the tragedy of those innocent youths who lived thousands of years ago leaves us with both fear and awareness. Sanctity and power in the wrong hands can destroy even the most precious aspects of humanity. The dark rituals of Babylon are not merely a part of history, they continue to exist as a warning, a reminder that humanity must remain vigilant and never forget.